EAGLES, Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Football Friday edition of Birds 365 here on JAKIB Sports. I'm your host, Zander Krause. That's my co-host, Johnny Mack, John McMullen, wrapping up another week here on the show as we inch closer to the 2025 NFL season, the 2025 banner drop season opener versus the Dallas Cowboys. Johnny Mack, how you doing on this Football Friday morning, brother, as we head into Memorial Day weekend?
Yeah, give people a break, and hopefully they take a little time to, say thank you. But yeah, a lot of people get excited about having a couple days off. So, and a little bit of respite, but the Eagles will be back on the field. First on-field OTA will be Tuesday of next week, so right after Memorial Day. So things ramping up from the spring perspective on the field, which will be good because all we've been talking about is nonsense off the field, so we can start talking about how things are shaping up for this team.
Yep, no doubt about it. So they'll hit the field next week. Johnny Mack, you said you'll be down there Wednesday, right? So the second day of their OTA?
Tentatively, that's the plan, subject to change, not official, but I expect to be down there Wednesday, not the first day, but the second day. They only have to open one. The cluster of OTAs, you have 3 in a cluster, and then you can have 4 on the last one. But the Eagles aren't even doing that. You have a 10 total allotment of OTAs. The Eagles are using 6. They have to open one of the cluster of 3. So there'll be one next week and one the week after that. And then they have mandatory minicamp for one day, and that'll be it until training camp.
There you go. So we'll have a little bit of on-field stuff next week that we'll be able to review, maybe talk about. I'm not sure if you'll see much there. Might be another repeat of rookie minicamp, maybe not. John, how many?
A little bit more. We usually get to watch OTAs, but it's usually like a 50-minute practice. They make it as short as possible. But
I wonder how many years away we are from that one day not even being there anymore for you guys. I mean,
it's coming.
I know.
But I think what's coming when they go to 18 games, and ultimately they're going to go to 18 games, they're not going to have these OTAs and they're just going to open up training camp a little bit earlier. I think that's the plan, and everybody's on board with it pretty much. So when that comes, I think that's going to be the setup. So you're going to have no spring work, and you're going to open up training camp a little bit earlier. That seems to be the way things are trending.
Yeah, I do find it a little funny when we talk about that, how so much. Now I'm a fan, and I'm not sitting here, professing from the high horse that I care about this. They're all grown men and they all make their own decisions. But I love how the league uses so many things under the guise of safety. And then they just want to add more games, like they're really,
frauds.
Yeah,
I mean, they're frauds from
they're
that.
Frauds.
I hate the safety discussion. A lot of people brought it up with the tush push because they use that as, and they act like, oh, Eureka, they're being hypocritical. Yeah, we all know they're hypocritical.
Right.
Fans are hypocritical about safety. They don't care. And basically, when the NFL or fans talk about safety, they're talking about concussions because they've been taught to care about concussions. Nobody cares about torn patellar tendons or torn labrums or torn ACLs other than if it affects their team and they lose a good player. Nobody cares about the guy limping. We'll talk to JAKIB later today. I mean,
yeah, it's true, man.
JAKIB played when the game was much more brutal and violent. And, there's a lot of guys that pay the price later in life. And I'm not talking about just cognitive. I'm talking about knee replacements, whatever. And they're limping around because this is a dangerous game to play. Yeah. Nobody cares about that.
No, right. I mean, they're well compensated, and they're all grown men making the decision. I just hate how they use that guise for stuff.
Well, I'm with you, and that's where I am. I'm like, well, they're adults. They know the dangers of the game. And they make that cost benefit analysis, which I believe in. and I lean on that.
Yeah,
But
I
I'm
agree.
consistent about it. I don't, say, oh, what craziness that somebody's limping later in life. I mean, that's the give and take.
Yeah. Dad says 20 plus games, way too much on the human body. I agree with that. What do you think the solution is to that? Do you think they add more roster spots? Do you think they, I know you mentioned maybe get rid of the OTAs, but let's be real, that's not doing too much for players who are playing 20 straight games in the NFL. What will that look like? Like, what other changes will they need to accompany that?
That's it. I mean, they'll go back to 2 preseason games. And they'll scale that. So and technically you'll be playing the same amount of games, but already, key players don't play in the preseason for the most part, or very little. Certain cities and coaches still do it, but very little. And as Nick says, you manage it during the week. To me, it'll become more NBA-ish, which it already has. And by that, I mean, don't practice a lot, especially late in the season. Becomes more walkthroughs and
Yeah.
Schoolwork, so to speak, meetings and that kind of thing. So not the old school, oh, we're not playing well, so we're gonna put the pads on and hit late in the season. Nobody does that. In fact, they do the opposite. They scale back to keep guys as fresh as possible. So that's already here. The only difference is they're going to 18 games, and to get to 18 games, they probably have to give up 1 preseason game, and nobody cares about that. And they're probably going to have to give up on-field OTAs and mini camp. And some people care about that, but I ultimately I don't think it matters much. I was looking back last year at the OTAs to see some of the, Ed, my buddy Ed Cratch does, and the title of the piece is overreactions. He's overreacting. He's telling, but you know how people take things,
Right.
One of the things is, and I was reading it, and yeah, I mean, Jalen Hurts was not sharp early on in the spring last season. If you remember, there was a lot of talk about another new offense, new terminology called 95% different. He called it at one point.
Yeah, he balked from putting a number on it this year.
Yeah. And there was a lot of uncertainty, and they were trying a lot of different things, and there was a lot of check downs and a lot of motion and trying to involve these things. That's another good reason we can ask G about, practice, evaluating practice. Like, people need to be taught to evaluate practice correctly. Because you're generally trying to get better, and often how do you get better? Well, you try things you're not good at.
Yeah, exactly.
So sometimes it can look ugly. And then when you get into the preparation standpoint, you scale everything back to what you do well and try to maximize that against your opponent. So, I would say Jim Schwartz is the one who told me that. Off season's about teaching. Training camp's about evaluation. There's some carryover, a little bit of teaching still at the start of training camp. And then you get into preparation, which is about week to week 1 opponent, week 2 opponent, compartmentalize. Like, nobody's looking ahead to week 6. And that's sort of how the NFL is set up these days.
Yep, no doubt about it. Well, good stuff there. As John mentioned, we'll have Gary Cobb on later in the show today about 9:20. All right, so we'll talk to G Cobb later as we head into Memorial Day weekend. An update for everybody who didn't hear the update yesterday. There will be no shows on Monday. Obviously, it's Memorial Day. All right, so we will take the day off. Obviously, a day of memory for all those who have given their lives, given the ultimate sacrifice for our country, for our great nation. So we will do that. We'll be off on Monday, then we'll return on Tuesday. All right, and we have the Eagles are, as John mentioned, on for OTAs. So we'll have plenty of good stuff to talk about next week on the show. John, you mentioned the offense there with Jalen Hurts and some of that stuff coming in. I'm curious to see, what this offense looks like this year, how much they try and change it, or don't change it at all. You know, Saquon obviously had a lot of carries last year. I don't know if they're going to stick to that this year, or you know, maybe try and hold them up a little bit, because they do have him under contract now for another couple of years. Is 400 plus carries 2 years in a row too many? And then you have the right guard discussion too. And the reason I bring that up is, you know, how much does the right guard factor into what they're trying to do with the offense as a whole? Where Mekhi Becton was, you know, tremendous in the running game, the way he bulldozed people out of there. And many times you saw Saquon, boom, running right up behind Mekhi Becton to get a big run. You think that has anything to do with what they're thinking for the offense in terms of who they try and get to be the starter there at right guard?
Yeah, I mean, typically they like bigger bodies there. You know, if you go back to Brandon Brooks, and who was a tremendous player, really big guy, 6'5", 340-ish when he played. And obviously last year with Mekhi, we were all like, really? You're going to put Mekhi at right guard? You know, how do you see over him as a quarterback? And it worked out beautifully. So they typically like that big power aspect of it. And certainly after what happened last year, you would think they'd want to go to you know, it's very difficult to find somebody as physically imposing as Mekhi Becton, but you typically they want to go a little bit bigger there. And in the past, that a lot of that had to do with Jason Kelsey, who was undersized for a center. So is Cam Jurgens, not to the degree Jason is, though. So maybe it's not quite as important. But I think ultimately it comes down to, you know, the best player. And Tyler Steen will get the first opportunity like he did last year. Doesn't mean he's going to win the job. He didn't win it last year. I think Kenyon Green will get a long look. And then you have a cast of thousands, basically, from Trevor Keegan. And you start thinking about, all right, will they move, you know, Miles Hinton inside? Will they move Cameron Williams inside? And people say, no, they're tackles. Well, so was Mekhi Becton.
Yeah, right.
You know, Jeff Stoutland's willing to do it if that's the right way to go. Now, I'm not expecting a day 3 guy to start on the offensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles unless something goes wrong. And hey, you know, throw Drew Kendall in that.
Yes, I was about to say next. Yeah, Drew Kendall. I know he was a center, but he played some guard too. No,
he didn't. I mean, he has, but you know, he was
didn't
so
at college, right? But
he was so good at Boston College as a center. He basically played every game, every snap at center. But you know, his dad was a guard predominantly. He's been taught to play guard. And center, because, you know, as an interior guy, you have to play all 3 positions, especially when you start as a backup. So he'll be fine. He's not the biggest guy either, though. So, you know, they clearly found something with the physicality. So I think they want to replicate that. I mean, the home run would be to tap into what Kenyon Green's physical traits are that made him the, whatever he was, the 15th overall pick in the draft. That would be the home run to me, but he was so bad in Houston, it's hard to visualize that. And then if that doesn't work out, it's sort of like who plays the best over the summer, and it should be a legitimate competition. You know, people, I guarantee we're not going to get into the locker room until week 1, you know, right before week 1. There'll probably be video though coming out, and maybe somebody will even ask it, because the Eagles generally, the back right of the Eagles locker room, they do it in order. It's left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle on the 5 lockers on the bottom right.
Right.
And it's, you know, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, who replaced Jason Kelsey. That was his locker for many years. And then Tyler Steen had that locker to start last year. And everybody's like, well, Tyler's the right guard. And it's like, no, they can move guys pretty easily. And Mekhi ended up taking that spot, and obviously Lane's on the end. So, you know, I'm sure Tyler will start in that position again, and it's up to him to win the job. And we'll see how it works out. But there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of bodies to the point you say, well, they're going to find somebody who can play between Cam Jurgens and Lane Johnson, because that helps as well. You got a Pro Bowl guy on one side, you got an All-Pro Hall of Famer on the other side. That helps as well when you get to play in between those guys.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm interested to see who wins that job. I'm kind of with you where I question Tyler Steen a little bit. I think they're going to go with end up going with a bigger bodied guy, but there's just so many to pick from, John. It's hard to pin down who it might be. That's why I'm curious to see if you get any look next week, maybe, or maybe if not next week, once they get the mini camp and to training camp, obviously we'll learn a lot more. But it's going to be interesting to follow that matchup. It's the only spot on offense that will have change. Yep, coming in.
Well, I'll say this: if you want a bigger body, the only way you can get a bigger body than Tyler Steen with the contenders in play is to play one of the rookies, to move Miles Hinton inside, to move Cameron Williams inside. Holland Pierce, a lot of people are excited about him. The Rutgers undrafted free agent. Those are the only guys that are bigger than Tyler Steen. So it's going to be tough to replicate what you had with Mekhi Becton.
Yeah.
But, they've done it in the past. People forget. It's crazy because Jeff Stoutland's up for the PFWA Dr. Z Award, which is basically lifetime achievement for assistant coach in the NFL. He was up for it last year, didn't get it. He's up for it again this year. But I'm reading the release they sent out, and, he's coached Pro Bowl players for 12 consecutive years, at least one Pro Bowl player for 12 consecutive years. Nobody's done that in the Super Bowl era. All pros, future Hall of Famers. People forget they were pretty damn good when Isaac Seumalo was playing left guard and then moved over to right guard because Landon Dickerson took over at left guard. And Isaac was more of the, he's a big guy, but not super big. And I would say over the past, since Brandon Brooks, the best right guard they've had is probably Isaac. So you can do it different ways.
Yeah, Mekhi Becton was pretty damn good last year too, but you're right. Isaac was a great player. He's now in Pittsburgh, still playing there. John, what do you think of Kevin Patullo coming in here? Do you think there's going to be a stall? Do you think it's going to be more simple for him? Because I think the offense is more established now around the quarterback and the offensive line than maybe in years past where we wondered if it was going to be a new play caller and a new scheme and all these different things. Like, I think the scheme is going to be the scheme. What are your expectations with Kevin Patullo coming in his first year as offensive coordinator?
Yeah, I think if you look at the offense, you've already seen so many different changes and basically thematically it ends up being very similar because you're building around the strengths of the team, which is basically number one, the offensive line. So you've always had a good running game. It's just went to historic levels last year with Saquon Barkley. You have a unique quarterback that you want to take advantage of with both the running game and the passing game. So I think it looks very similar, whether it was Nick Sirianni, Shane Steichen, Brian Johnson, Kellen Moore. It ended up very similar. And he constantly tried to evolve it and constantly try to add things to it. But it's going to look very similar. I mean, Kevin's been here that entire time. The entire time. He came in with Nick. He's Nick's right-hand man. So this guy's been around Jalen Hurts for a long time. That's why I sensed a much more inner calmness about this change with Jalen than I did last year when he was talking about 95% different terminology.
Yeah, well, I do think Jalen learned from that. Like, I think he kind of tried. I don't know. Maybe it's just my read. But when I listened to Jalen, I thought he was kind of made a conscious effort to not stir that pot a little bit. At least that's how I heard it.
Well, I think the number wise, because 95 was silly to begin with, but yeah, number wise, he made a conscious effort. But I'm just talking, just the way he felt. And he was I think he's much more calm about this change because he knows Kevin and he's known Kevin for years. Versus somebody coming from completely outside the organization, which was going on last year. And was completely new to the organization. So I think and sometimes comfort can be a good thing and sometimes comfort could be a bad thing. So I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be a good thing, but I think he's much more comfortable because he's worked with this guy for a long time.
Yeah, no, I get that sense too. What are the expectations for the offense this year? What were they ranked, John, last year with collectively? It was number 8, was it? Number 8 overall?
Number 8, yeah. 8 2 years in a row. But last year they were second in rushing,
right?
Because Baltimore also had a historic season, and bottom 5 in passing. I don't know. I don't have the exact. It was 27 or 28. So it's different. Wasn't as balanced last year, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And part of it is just simple. When you're that good running it, I mean, it's going to take away from the passing game. But yeah, I do think there's going to be an emphasis, and you're going to see it starting next week about similar to last year, where everybody was concerned about the staleness of the offense and, up to Jeffrey Lurie. And that was why Kellen Moore was brought in. And, oh, you can't be bottom 5 in motion. You can't do this. And they tried all these things in the offseason, and they tried to get better, and they tried to get better. There was a little bit more, but ultimately they scaled back to very similar offense because they're taking advantage of the players they have. And the same thing will happen this year. They'll try to evolve. And you see where it goes. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I think is where the Eagles are going to be. And until somebody proves that they can stop this running game, they're going to. And that, Kansas City, that was their goal in the Super Bowl, and they did it. And the Eagles were able to pivot. So they can pivot, and they have enough talent to do either. So that's the positive part of it. But they want to be more consistent throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about accentuating the players you have on the roster, and I understand that Saquon Barkley and that offensive line is unbelievable, but we still do have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. Like, I feel like you got to get those guys involved a little bit more this year in this offense. But hey, listen, if they're running like the same way they are, Dabney brings up they were 31st in pass attempts last year, which I don't know if he's correct on that. I'd have to double check, but
they didn't pass it a lot at all. So yeah, I mean
Hurts had 20 to 23 attempts a game around after that bye week. So
yeah, I mean they had an historic rushing season. So part of that is just and again, they were successful in winning games. So again, one of the things I hate, and I know I have to answer it, and I'm going to answer it 18 times this year, and while the Eagles hope 21 times, but what's the run pass ratio going to be? What's depends on the game. If it's a tougher season and they're in a lot of close games or they're losing in the fourth quarter, they're going to have to throw it more. I mean, that is wholly dependent on the circumstance of individual games. And when you're winning, like every year, somebody thinks they've solved the problem. Well, the top 8 teams, they're all heavy run teams. Well, the top 8 teams are generally good. They're always heavy run
they're winning
teams.
games.
They're winning.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's that's when I chuckle at because coaches chuckle at it. It's like, it's pretty obvious why that happens the way it happens. Whereas if you're losing by 2 touchdowns and you're a bad team or you're a mediocre team, you tend to have a high volume of passing because you're trying to come back. You're trying to win games. And if you're down 14 points with 6 minutes left, you're not going to stay patient when you get the football. You're going to try to go down the field quickly, and you do that by throwing the football. It's not hard to figure that out.
Yeah.
So, but evidently
they did create a new path though last year, John, even amongst the modern NFL, man. Like it worked so good last year. It's hard to even it's hard to even nitpick on any of it. And then you wonder, boy, if they can just take that same formula, why change it? I guess it's more of a personal thing with me where I'm like, I want AJ Brown to get the ball more. I think that guy could be the best receiver in football.
I think everybody does. But and the tush push is a good example of this. And I give my buddy Zach Berman credit because he wrote about it. But and thankfully I'm glad because I felt like I'm on an island. And Zach, said the interest has outgrown its importance, which I agree with. And the push, and Zach explained it better than me, so I give him credit. The push might be the most inconsequential part of the play, which is more about Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Mekhi Becton last year inside, and the quarterback, Jalen Hurts. How many times do you watch a push play and he's got it anyway before Dallas Goedert comes in or Saquon comes in? How many times? It's about the quarterback and the offensive line. And that's where, and the same thing, it expands to the running game. Yeah, the Eagles showed everybody a path to win, but that path is, well, you have the greatest rushing season in NFL history because you have a running back who's capable of doing that behind an offensive line that's capable of blocking for somebody to give them the opportunity to do that. I mean, that's easier said than done. And oh, by the way, you probably are going to need the number 1 defense. So when we talk about small paths, yeah, they got a path. That's a small path. But they have built up the talent on this team. And that's why it's crazy to me that people act like that's a big part of the talent of this team is outrageous, especially in the modern era. You watched, as Eagles fans, you watched one of the greatest teams of all time in hindsight.
Did you hear Saquon called it a top? He thinks it's a top 5 team of all time. Maybe a little biased there, but I don't think he's far off.
Well, certainly I kind of shifted to the modern era versus because it's hard. It's basically hard, it's basically a different game. In the modern era, it's unquestionably a top 5 team, and he might be low. So I'm taking the 70s and 60s. They're completely different games.
Yeah, like Daz. Yeah, I don't have this type of knowledge. Daz says 72 Dolphins, 85 Bears.
See, I'm not even. We're getting the Dolphins. So, I mean, the Dolphins because they're undefeated. They're still the only undefeated team.
Right. 2000 Ravens and 84 Niners. So only 2 of those teams are post 2000, and one of them is 2000.
Yeah, and even 2000. I mean, is a different game. So it's constantly shifting, but. And certainly the performance in the Super Bowl was, top 5 ever. Yeah, I mean, so it's easy to say just copy the Eagles, but the people are copying the wrong thing because you can't wake up and say, all right, everybody says with the tush push, well, you can do it too. Well, yeah, but that took them years to get in a position by drafting offensive linemen, cultivating offensive linemen, drafting how many quarterbacks squat 600 pounds? it's not like you can just wake up and say, all right, I'm gonna go get the most physical left guard in football, and I'm gonna get that quarterback who, can squat 600. It doesn't work that way. That's why I say teams should copy what the Eagles do, but philosophy wise, it just keep drafting offensive linemen. And by the way, get an offensive lineman developer.
Might be harder said than done, or easier said than done, especially the developer part of it. But I do you're due right to a point. Like, Eagles have one spot on the offensive line, one spot open. They got like 10 dudes right now fighting for that spot.
Well, and I'm going to vote for Jeff, and I voted for him last year, and I think he should get that award. I was talking about the Lifetime Achievement Award for assistant coaches.
Yeah, right.
But even as good as Jeff Stoutland is, even as good as Vic Fangio is, and there's a lot of good assistants in Philadelphia. I think Jamal Singleton is great at running back, but there's a lot of good assistants. It's easier to find coaches than players. It's still talent first.
What makes Jeff Stoutland so special, and from what you've seen?
Well, I think one, he's, that's the thing. Fred Johnson talked about this last year, and he was really, it was really interesting to hear, because when he came here, when he got here, he was really depressed and really in a dark place. And he admitted this, which is rare. And he was like, Stoutland would be on him in practice. And, anybody who knows Stoutland at all, he's, at practice, he's going to get on you, no matter if you're Lane Johnson down to, the undrafted free agent, Holland Pierce. He's going to get on you. He's going to give you all the same amount of teaching, the same amount of time. And Fred got here and he said, man, just leave me alone. I'm like third string. Just leave me. I'm holding the bag. And he's like, and he wouldn't give up on him. And he's trying to say, you got a lot of talent, and he's very, uplifting to them. And he buys into them as people and all that kind of stuff. And I do think the modern era is a little bit different. Like, I don't think you could be a good coach in the modern era like Bill Parcells. And by that, I mean the old school hard nose. All right, I'm going to embarrass this guy in front of the rest of I don't think that works now.
Yeah, right.
Different generation, different ways to get at him. So I think you have to be relentlessly positive, relentlessly optimistic. And then, his technique and his ability to teach angles and is top tier. So it's a bunch of different things, but I think it comes down to, as cliche as it is, because Nick always says it, connecting with people. And you only, the goal of an assistant coach is to get the guy a little bit better. You can't turn Fred Johnson into Lane Johnson. Doesn't have that in him. But he was better when he left here than when he got here. Immensely better.
Exactly.
So, somebody with Jordan Mailata's physical gifts, because he's the guy you look at and say, all right, he built him up from literally ground zero. Never played the game, but he had these awesome physical gifts.
Jordan had everything else too, though, in my opinion, John. He had the mentality, the mindset, the approach, everything. I mean, Jordan was the perfect storm for Stoutland.
Yeah, but there was a lot of doubt there.
Man. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
No, I mean, in Jordan's mind.
In Jordan's mind.
I was saying yesterday, like, he didn't think he belonged when he first got here, because he's
how could he? I mean, it's not like he showed up at a college campus on a D1 school where there's good play. He showed up at the best of the best of the best of the best, Yeah.
And he's, I always joke with Joe Roseman, for people that remember, and Jordan calls him Smoking Joe, man. if you were at practice watching Joe Osman beat Jordan Mailata like a drum, you wouldn't even think that Jordan Mailata was ever going to become anything. But that's where the positivity comes into it. So he's saying, Stoutland's behind the scenes telling him, you're getting better. You're getting better. Just do the things we're teaching you. Ultimately, it's going to click. And he's become, the poster child of just Stoutland University, which they've now branded. But he had this at the core. He had these, 6'8", 380-pound people aren't supposed to move like Jordan Mailata. They it's freakish. So at the core, he had that. The athletic, and that's why he got his chance, because people are looking at him like, look at this guy. Look at the way he moves.
It's incredible.
So, that's where and then the top tier guys turn into the top tier guys, Landon, Cam. But the guys, Brett Toth, who's been here, man, that guy's been here forever. He's never going to be a star. He's never going to be a starter. But, he's got an NFL pension because he can do everything. He can play 5 positions. And he came in, I don't know if people remember, but he went to Army, and that was before they changed the rules. So, he had to do his tour originally. And that makes it really difficult for guys that would play at military academies. And they changed that rule, and he was in the midst of it. He had already lost a bunch of weight. When he got here, it was like 260 pounds. Because he was doing his duty with the Army. And you didn't need to be 300 plus pounds to do that. In fact, it hampered you. So, he came here, and he slowly developed, left, went to Arizona, went to Carolina for a little bit, keeps coming back. And he keeps coming back because he can do everything. And Stoutland has turned him into this sort of jack of all trades. He's a natural left tackle, but he can play every position, including center, although sometimes he does have difficulty snapping the football. But even guys like that, he makes better. Everybody gets a little bit better.
Yep.
And that's
which is ultimately the goal of coaching, as I've heard you talk about before. Yep.
And that's, it doesn't mean everybody's going to turn into a star. Andre Dillard, that guy had everything to be a great left tackle in the NFL from a physical perspective. And he wasn't. So, part of it's on the person as well.
Absolutely. The internal person, not just the physical. No doubt about it. Let's get to a super chat here as we talk about this offense. All right. I still got a bunch more questions here on the offense to see, what it's going to look like in 2025, what the expectation are, and what's going to be mandated, and what I mean by that is what our defense is going to dictate the Eagles need to do differently. It's fine and dandy to say, we don't need a pass more. We got Saquon. Well, what if you get a bunch of games like the Super Bowl? What will be dictated for the Eagles offense to run? Rashid says, can the passing game be better? Absolutely. But for context, AJ had 1,100 yards in 13 games, and Smith had 850 yards in 13 games. If they play a full season, it all balances out. Yeah, I mean, the attempts were way down, though, Rashid, but you're right. I mean, those are pretty significant.
Well, I don't think too many people doubt that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith can play at a high level.
Yeah, very high level, both of them.
The question is, it's a very first world problem to have. We always talk about receivers. They want the football by nature. You don't want receivers who don't want the football. And they all want the football by nature. And if you're running the football as effectively, they're not going to get as many opportunities as they would if you're not running the football effectively. So it's very difficult. That's where the whole getting everybody on the same page, getting everybody to buy in. And that's made much easier if you win. And the Eagles won 16 of 17 to close the season. So, generally nobody's going to be the asshole when you're winning 16 of 17. Nobody's going to raise their hand. Yeah, I get we're winning, but, I deserve the ball more because you look like, you look terrible. So the question becomes if you start, losing a couple games and what happens then. And it's coming. It happens to everybody, adversity in this league. It's cyclical. Guys will get hurt. Guys will have up seasons, down seasons. So there's going to be some adversity. And that's why Nick deserves probably a little bit more credit than he gets.
No doubt about it. Rashid, good super chat, brother. I'm with you. I do wonder, John, when it comes to the topic of AJ and Smitty, how many yards would, and not that yards are everything, clearly not, but how many yards would AJ Brown get? How would he be talked about in the NFL as a receiver if he just played in an offense that was like Cincinnati's, where they pass all over the play? Now, I'm not saying that offense is better than ours because they won 8 games last year. Now, they had a crappy defense, but I'm just purely asking about the skill of AJ Brown, what he would be able to accomplish in an offense like that. I mean,
if he was in a higher volume offense, I think more of the casual fans or casual, even media observers would think he's better. That's the way it works.
I think he'd be the best receiver in football.
Yeah, he's in the conversation already, which tells you how good he is.
Yeah.
He's top 5 receiver now, 3-time second team All-Pro. 3 years in a row with the Eagles. He's already regarded as a top 5 receiver. So, me, if you're in the conversation, that's good enough.
Right.
But yeah, I think, and I've talked a lot, I think AJ remains the best pure football player on the team. I think he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, no,
and everybody knows how good he is.
He is damn good, man. Tough to cover, impossible to cover, really. Eduardo checks in. He says, "Could y'all imagine if they put Mailata at running back?" I think once upon a time, Eduardo, we envisioned if they were going to use him at the goal line of some sorts, but can't do that when he's the best left tackle in football.
Yeah, people harken back to his rugby highlights.
Yeah. Well, you remember those highlights were pretty crazy, John.
Yeah, well, he's 6'8", running over people like 380, running over. That's when I talked about his movement skills. You're not supposed to be able to move like that. But yeah, that's very gimmicky. The Eagles don't need to be gimmicky. People love gimmicks. They don't need to be gimmicky. I think that's a good thing. Every once in a while, Philly special, obviously, you run a trick play, but you don't want to rely on that stuff. Lane Johnson got a touchdown. So you might see it, but certainly it's never going to be and he would not be a good running back if that's the question.
No, but I bet you he'd get some yards. I bet it'd be fun to watch.
It'd be tough to when we talk about movement skills. He doesn't move like an NFL running back.
No, you'd have to do a fullback and just quick handoff and get him to start plowing forward. Might be a bad day for the offensive linemen who are in front of him, though.
Yeah. I don't think you want Jordan playing running back.
No. Abe checks in. He says, J-Mac, why was Darnold number 5 on your MVP list for 2024?
Because he was first of all, he finished in the top 5. So what are you talking about? My God, the guy had a tremendous. Remember, it's a regular season award, Abe. Look at his season. Why wouldn't you have him in the top 5? Is the better question. He won 14 games. He played at a phenomenally high level. Why wouldn't he'd be in the top. And he was in the top 5. I believe he was 4th. I have to look it up. But I had him as 5. Yeah, why wouldn't he be? I mean, number one, right off the bat, it's a regular season award. Playoffs have nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it.
Which
Fans
I think
have
is
to
kind of
drill that.
stupid, but I get it.
Whatever. That's what it is.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying my personal
we vote
opinion
on that, and I have a vote before the Super Bowl. So even if you say, well, you should count the wild card. I forget the date of when we have to have it. Remember, the NFL honors is before the Super Bowl. It's before the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's the week before.
It's the week of, leading up.
Oh, the week of. Right, yeah.
But we have to have the votes in way before that. It's a regular season award. So again, Abe, why wouldn't he be in the top 5? If you're being objective.
Abe says he was a pumpkin the last 2 regular season games. I get a kick out of when people call people pumpkin.
There's certain people I can't help. You don't like the guy. Because of the start of his career, and because he didn't live up to the hype of being whatever he was, the 3rd overall pick, and most of these fans declared him as dead. And he stinks. He's this. He's that. Well, he won 14 freaking games last year. Completed, I'm just looking it up, 361 of 545 passes, 66% of his passes, 4,319 yards, 35 touchdowns. His passer rating was 102.5. He set an NFL record for most consecutive 100 passer rating games. You're the moron.
I don't think he should have been off the top 5. I'm simply entertaining.
I'm talking to Ed. I mean, you're the moron. It's a regular season award. He set a record, an NFL record, for most 100 passing Raider games in a row. I just gave you the numbers. Are you effing kidding me?
He really only had one bad game in the regular season, right? It was that final game versus Detroit. That was it. It was 18 of 41, which is pretty bad in that game. But other than that, I think he had a pretty good year.
You think?
Yeah.
And by the way, Detroit won 15 games. It's not like he. And again.
Yeah, he didn't lose to the Panthers.
Yeah. And again, as you saw with Detroit and then the playoffs, which don't count, again, because it's a regular season award, they struggle with their offensive line late. And they couldn't block the Rams and they couldn't block the Lions, which is pretty sad when you couldn't block the Lions, to be honest, because, they had lost so many players. And Aiden Hutchinson wasn't out there. Lynn McNeil wasn't out there. But remember, they lost Darisaw, So anyway, yeah, fans annoy the shit out of me sometimes.
Come on, Abe. Let's see if we got any more chats. So we'll get to a break. That's it. All right, we'll get to our first commercial break. When we come back, I got some questions on defense. I want to finish up some offensive questions as well. I do have some questions there as we move into the 2025 season. How different or the same will it look here in the 2025? Coming off of a historic season last year with a historic running back and obviously Super Bowl champions. Going to be tough to repeat, but we'll talk about all that coming up. And then in hour number 2 as well, we had the great Gary Cobb. Looking forward to talking to G Cobb as we head into Memorial Day weekend. Appreciate all you guys being here on this Football Friday. Hit that like button and we'll be right back in 3 minutes on Birds 365.
The following is a real